Welcome back to Wordsmythe Screenwriting Essentials. This is Chapter 5, and we are going to be looking at the main character, how we create a main character, and their significant others. Because one of the things I always tell my students is that if you have a hero, a main character, or a heroine, and they have a quest, and you have a villain, one of the things that you need to do, and this is so true of real life as well, is that if you're going to complicate their lives, so first of all, if you start off and they have a quest, and they walk through the door into the hallway and say their quest is to get an apple, and apples are incredibly rare in their world, and they walk into the hallway and, well, there's an apple. Well, gee, that was a great 3-minute film. It kind of rates right up there with The Sneeze. So if their quest is to get an apple because apples are incredibly rare in their world, the first is that they're rare, that's great. But we're not going to have them walk into the hallway and simply pick up an apple because that's très boring. We're going to provide some complications. And so perhaps they have a best friend that works at a grocer that specializes in importing apples, and they can get one, they think. But all the main character needs to do is do something for that best friend first. So one of the things I always say to my students is, if you want to complicate your main character's life, give them family, give them friends. Because as critical as those people are in our lives, they do make it incredibly difficult to simply go from A to B. If any of you have children, you know that you start off intending to make the beds. In the meantime, you pick up the train set, you do the dishes, you answer the phone, you write a note, you say, no, she's getting ready for school right now, she can't come out, and finally about 10 o'clock, you actually make it into the bedroom once you've done 9,000 other things and actually get the beds made. So that's what we want to happen with your main character. One of the things that I think is really wonderful about this film is because it's seamless, and because it's a comedy, we don't stop and really look at how complex it is. But let's take a moment and flip our chart here and look at the storylines. Now, your A storyline is your main character, and often the ups and downs that your main character, he or she, encounters in her quest to get the apple. But in Monsters, Inc., I think that this little film is very subversive in that it supports probably about 10 or 11 storylines. The main storylines, let's go through them. There's Sully and Mike. There's Sully and Randall, because of course Randall's the bad guy, and so Sully has a very close relationship with Randall. There's Sully, and eventually there's Boo, the human child that gets let into the world. Then there's Sully, and let's not forget his relationship with Waternoose, his boss and mentor. And we don't see a lot of Waternoose, but that's a very pivotal relationship in this film. And then let's go on to that there's Sully and Mike, and then there is Mike and Celia. And this is where, in that first instance where we see Celia, this is where the film does, I think, its final genre shift. Up until this point, if you hadn't pegged it as a buddy film, by the time we see Mike and Celia, little alarm bells should go off in your head, because in classic buddy films, we see the world as the buddies, they do, you know, whatever it is they do together, and then a woman appears, or a racehorse, or a dog that talks, or something. But something enters the picture, and in most cases it's a woman, it's a female relationship, enters the picture and skews the relationship, the energy between the buddies, puts them constantly just a little off balance. So Mike has this enduring relationship with Sully that is now tweaked, threatened, put off balance by Celia's appearance in his life. And then, because really only moments later, in the film world, they balance the equation by suddenly Sully has someone appear in his life that now completes the equation, but also adds stress to the relationship of the buddies initially. That initial relationship now has a stress on it from Celia. She has things she wants Mike to do. And suddenly, Boo Boo appears and Sully becomes a surrogate father figure with all of the energies and stresses intended upon that. And so now the two buddies are pulled further and further apart by their relationships with female figures that impact their ability to kind of focus on their relationship. So that's a classic structure of a buddy film. The other thing that I want to be really clear about is the relationship between Boo and Randall. Randall's the bad guy, but he also happens to be Boo's monster. That's how Boo enters the storyline to begin with. Randall has her door, and what we discover later on in the film is that he's intent on kidnapping her. And before he can do that, she enters the world and attaches herself to Sully, and he takes responsibility for her. But Boo and Randall have that relationship, but the child who is scared and the monster that the monster world has selected to essentially be that kid's monster. And so something has to happen with this relationship in order for the audience to feel satisfied that we've tied up all our loose ends. And so we'll get to that. So we have 7 storylines going, at least 7 major storylines going, and they're all set up in the first 30 minutes of the film. So I think you probably are beginning to see what I see in this little movie. It's really complex. It's subversive. You're watching it, you're laughing, you're enjoying it, and so you don't really notice all of the stuff that's there that's supporting all those laughs. But there are more storylines than that, but these are the 7 main ones. And so one of the things that we want to talk about, I talked about the stresses between, the stresses placed on the relationship between Mike and Sully by having friends and family attached to them. And so one of the things I want to be really clear to you is the reason we do that is not just because we want to make an interesting movie, but the character of the main character is revealed through their actions. How do they react to the stresses that are placed upon them? And so when Boo enters Sully's life, his reaction to her entering his life is far different than it would have been if she had entered Randall's life. And so it not only clarifies who our two, both hero and villain are, but with each situation where Boo impacts Sully, essentially his character is revealed by the way he reacts. And so that's why we complicate our heroes' lives, is so that the audience can see. So you understand that the distinction between someone saying to you, oh yeah, I'm really easygoing, and somebody who can be making dinner, have 5 kids howling around their feet, and phone calls every 30 seconds, and still manage to maintain their composure and laugh when you tell a joke. That person is really easygoing, and they've just demonstrated it through all of the stresses that were placed upon them and their ability to still follow the thread of your conversation and laugh at the punchline. It's like, so what we need to know as an audience, we need to see the qualities of our main character that you want us to see, that are critical to moving the story forward. So we place stresses on them so that we can demonstrate to the audience what it is we're trying to tell. It'd be fine, you know, Waternoose could stand there and say, he did that wonderful introduction, and now here's Sully, the world's greatest hero, blah, 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 and he's going to reinvent a whole culture before the end of the film. Well, the film's over. We don't have to see anymore. So essentially what we do is, again, it's a signifier. We place stresses on our main character, we see their reaction, and we conclude, oh yes, I like this guy, his story's worth following, he's somebody I want to see what happens to them. The other thing that you do as well is that you escalate the stress you put on your main character and the other characters. Let's not forget, there are a number of different storylines we're going to be supporting in this story we're telling. So it may start off that essentially your main character breaks a shoelace just as she's getting ready to run a marathon. And she's slated to win. She breaks the shoelace. She can't find a replacement for it, so she makes something up, or she safety pins it together. And so she goes off to run her marathon. And then she loses her shoe. And so essentially, as we proceed through her quest, which is to run the marathon, more and more pieces of her equipment fall off her. She gets lost. She can't find the water station. She has to, pardon my expression, pee like a racehorse, and there's no place around to do it. So essentially, we know where she starts, we know where she wants to go, she wants to win the marathon. In between, we escalate the series of problems that she's going to encounter. They start small, they get bigger. So one of the things that we can do in solidifying our notion of story arc is we can choose a storyline and we can work our way through it. So what I'd like to do here in class, and what you can do at home with your copy of Monsters, Inc., is there's a very small storyline which in its entirety will cost you about 5 minutes of time. And it's the George Sanderson storyline. So it starts off in scene number 9. So if you go to scene selection on your DVD and pull up number 9, it's called, in parentheses, it has its title, and it's called 2319. So what we see is the opening scene where we meet George and see his dilemma. The second scene intensifies his dilemma. And then at the very end of that sequence, scene 24, it's called Banished. We see it go from beginning where it's kind of hapless but not horrible, and then we see it go down to where his problem intensifies, and then we see his storyline take a big upswing as he solves his own problem. And one of the critical things that you want to remember when you're creating story and complexities for your characters is you always let the characters solve their own problem. Back to the Boo and Randall story. It appears, although Sully does a lot of really great things for Boo, she maintains her sense of integrity and identity as an independent and capable person throughout the film. And then at the end, it is Boo who rescues Sully. This is a really important point in this movie because A, it reinforces Boo's independence and tenacity. What we've already known about her, this reinforces it. It also takes the solution to Boo's problem and puts it squarely on Boo. Boo solves her own problems. It takes her a while to figure out how to do that, but if Sully had rescued Boo, it wouldn't have felt good to us. It would have felt like all of those terrible princess stories where essentially she's rescued and she lives a life happily ever after, except for that she never knew her own grit, her own determination. She never got to reap the rewards of solving her problems herself. And so the writers very astutely created a scene where Boo was threatened by Randall and was scared, so she fell back into her old formula of, oh gosh, scary monster, until she had a reason to pull herself out of it and think of someone else, and she solved her own problem by essentially bashing Randall until it was clear she was not afraid of this monster anymore. And as Sully says, and afterwards, well, you're not afraid, I guess you're out of a job, no one's afraid of you anymore, and they chuck Randall out. So essentially it's really important when you create dilemmas for your characters to, unless your premise of the movie is that, you know, many hands make light work, or, you know, friends are in it forever or something, your characters need to solve their own problems for it to feel satisfying, both to you as a writer and to the audience that is watching your film. Home study story arc, we've enumerated the George Sanderson story arc. So what I'd like you to do at home is I'd like you to pick any one of these stories, or there's a myriad other short stories and story arcs in Monsters, Inc. So I want you to find one, and I want you to find the scenes where those, like a beads on a necklace, those stories are connected. So if you're going to follow, say, the Boo and Randall story, find the scenes where they are together. Find the scenes where the first time you see them together, and then the second time intensifying that conflict, that friction between them, and follow it through to completion. That'll give you a clear sense of the beginning, the middle, and the end in story arcs. So go ahead and start that process at home, and then when you've finished, come back and join us again then for Chapter 6 of Wordsmythe Screenwriting Essentials.